let's talk about the League Cup final then this Sunday at 3:00 against Hibs. I asked on the Huddle Breakdown Twitter page last night if you could have one player back for this game in terms of injuries. Would you take Kyogo? Would you take Jota, or would you take James Forrest? Poor old James Forrest got 0.9% off the vote. Jota came in at
his mother voted.
31.2% for Jota, and then a whopping 67.9% for Kyogo. Same question to you then, guys. Who would you have in the team? Who would have the biggest impact on the Celtic side coming into this cup final, Kyogo or Jota?
Okay, so I didn't answer your previous question properly, so I'm going to answer that one and the one you just asked at the same time. So you said, what am I most concerned about? What are the biggest weaknesses going into the game? So the biggest issue I've still got with this Celtic team is we're just simply not scoring enough goals. Right? It's as simple as that. We're leaving about 3/4 of a goal in expected goals on the pitch every single game in the league. Every single game. At one point in the season, that was nearly one. We were leaving one goal on the pitch every single game. And how long can you go on like that before some negative variance catches you out? And we've seen over the last week, with thanks to you and Anderson, Alan Muir and Hunk, lads like Hungbo, that there's plenty of that to go around, right? So that's my biggest concern. So really, to combat that, you want goal scorers in the team. So for me, that would be Kyogo, to answer your second question, because if that increases the chance of getting more goals, then you take that. I like Jota, but he's never going to be a prolific goal scorer. I'd love to have him in the team, clearly, just for the fact that it would be great fun and he's very exciting to watch, and it would make a great spectacle of it to see him in a final. But yeah, we need goals. We need goals in the team. That's the absolute biggest concern for me. Because like I say, it looks like it almost doesn't matter who we put in the team. We're going to create the same number of chances, which is great. But we're just not finishing. We're just not finishing enough of them. So, yeah.
Just before I get your answer to that question, James, some breaking news: the Nations League draw has been taking place in the last hour or so, and Scotland are in the same group as Ireland for that. It's Scotland, Ukraine,
some bants end up.
Scotland, Ukraine, and Armenia. So it's going to be
who? Ukraine,
Ukraine and Armenia.
Armenia.
So I can see Ukraine tearing Ireland apart. But the Scotland against Ireland game, that's going to be a very interesting one. So we might do a couple of shows when those games are happening, so we can, as you say, get some bans. But there's some comments coming in about this question that I've asked. It is a hypothetical one, James. I'm not saying the Celtic should be risking any of these players before they're fit to play in these games. So I just mean in terms of the impact they would have in the team, who do you think would be the best to bring back?
I'd probably go with Kyogo just because of his two-way value, meaning that his value in defending and tracking back and pressing being so high relative to other players, and given let's say prone to error at times in judgment, some of Hibs players have, particularly in the center back position. I think that could be a good matchup. So yeah, that's probably where I would go. I'll use that as this issue about Kyogo potentially playing on Sunday to self-promote here, because I wrote an article on this, and I was surprised by what I found. Was the degree with which what we're confronting relative to Ange's playing style is quite different than, and I've been poking around subsequent to writing this article, meaning that I basically looked at the volume of games and the amount of recovery days in between games. And I just picked an arbitrary, because of, kind of normal scheduling, games of 4 days or less in between games. If you kind of think Thursday to Sunday or Wednesday to, so it's kind of a proxy for 2 games a week, if you think about it like that. And so far we're running at about 78%, I think, of the games are fitting that criteria. And if you look at his history of managing, there's only other one season that he was close, and that was the season, not surprisingly, that Marinos made it into the Asian Champions League. So playing twice a week a lot, the equivalent of playing in Europe. And in the league, they finished 9th and significantly underperformed their XG. And one of the issues was that they didn't score enough relative to their XG. So I wonder theoretically if there's something kind of structural. I've been skeptical that these XG models relative to expected points and that kind of, we're too early in the in the evolution of these statistics and the measurements of the data that these are all encompassing. That the unexplainable factors, whether people have always talked about the qualitative things, like leadership and that kind of thing. I've even said, we're probably missing a good bit of other things. Like, I've talked about the velocity of the ball when you shoot it, quality of shooters, and they're not all the same. Aguero and Haaland shoot different than the striker at Hamilton. You know what I mean? Even though they take the same shot from the same position. So my concern is that some of this might be structural relative to his style of play, and it being compounded by lack of depth. So, whether or not they bring back Kyogo too soon, I get really worried about how we're managing these injuries and potentially introducing longer term injury risk, meaning that turning a 2 or 3 week, like we saw with Taylor. I mean, we did see that earlier. They tried to bring him back from his shoulder thing, and what was initially a 2 or 3 week kind of setback turned into 3 months or 2 months, whatever it was. And that's my concern, is that this seems like it might be something we're dealing with the entire season, even with reinforcements coming in January, just because of this is a really difficult thing to be doing, playing this way with this kind of fixture congestion. And I hope in a way that he doesn't play on Sunday, again, not knowing anything about where he's at relative to fitness, just from a risk perspective. Guys that pull their hamstrings usually are out longer than a week and a half.
Yeah. No, I don't think there's any case for him being, but I don't think it's even possible that I don't think he will be, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, my fear is a cultural one, right? So Ange talking about, well, if you leave it up to Kyogo, right? And some of these topics are not very popular, but if you go back and listen to the open goal interview of Kieran Tierney and what he went through at Celtic relative to taking painkillers and choosing to play when he was doing physical damage to himself to the point where he was so injured that he had to take 9 months off or whatever it was. I mean, a guy in his early 20s injuring himself, playing it hurt with painkillers, that Scott Brown playing against Cluj, right? With a bad toe, and we saw how horrible that turned. So guys playing hurt, it's kind of that old blood and guts, blood and thunder culture, which, in some ways is can be good, meaning that in a one-off, that kind of thing. But there's a fine line between being tough and being stupid.
Yeah,
right.
I know technically they shouldn't be allowed to do it, but you're not going to find many Premier League or many like high-level elite footballers that will sit out if they're given the chance.
Well, that's right. So that's what I'm saying is if most of these people, they're hyper competitive, that's how they're built, they're not going to keep themselves out. They're not going to hold themselves out. So there has to be an adult in the room or adults in the room that are making informed risk reward calculations, not only from a player perspective, I mean, the interest of their career and that kind of thing, but also what happened with Tierney was just moronic. I mean, this huge asset that we were allowing to have, this really terrible injury risk enter the picture and jeopardize potentially massive amounts of money. So for the length of the season and the risk of the season, to gamble and say, okay, that's why I was so critical of the decision to having him play against Betis. It's like, what's the upside relative to what the potential downside is? And so the reason why I got into this is not only is this just kind of intuitive, Ange plays the demanding style, but you then compound on these other factors and I've talked about this before, is nonlinear risk. Like you pile risks upon risks upon risks. This is part of how I kind of had a framework to analyze what happened last season, because we had so many risks piling on top, including the pandemic, that manifested in so many different ways for Celtic last season. And I'm concerned that we're having a completely different circumstances and specifics, but relative to injury, squad depth, and fixture congestion and style of play, you layer those factors on top, and now all of a sudden I think we've got some risks that probably are not well understood or appreciated at the club, and I think they need to be really careful about how they manage this, because we've clearly seen what's happened so far. And that's what I'm saying. I don't think this is going to get better. I don't think this has been bad luck. I don't think that this is, oh boy, we just happen to have a bunch of guys pulling muscles. I think that the workload and the frequency of games and the depth in squad it's not changing to a big degree. So hopefully they're careful. That's my point. Is I want them to be careful and not jeopardize long-term problems like Kyogo being out for 3 months with a torn hamstring. Because he wants to play in a final, that kind of thing. Of course, he wants to play in the final. So somebody's got to make a better decision.
Mm-hmm. So, just as we round this up and get into the specifics of this game, do you want to explain, Alan, the difference between a final and league games when it comes to analytics? Because I guess part of what we do on this show is judged on a long-term basis, where you can make judgment calls on trends and things that are continuously happening. But in finals, that sort of all goes out the window.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it highlights, as I keep trying to emphasize in a lot of these episodes, is the fine margins between what you might classify as a good player and a very good player, or an average player and a good player. They're not these gaps. I mean, clearly there's outliers. So something like a Messi is just almost ridiculous in terms of the level by which he's an outlier on so many performance metrics. But in the main, normal footballers, there's not a huge gap. And the reason I say that is, you saw last night, right? You saw last night the quality and the intensity of Ross County's pressing, neutered Celtic for large parts of that game. This is the team that's been bottom of the league all season, but are now on a very good run. They're confident and they're organised. And you add confidence and organisation to a high level, and you can get players that you might think, based on the amount they're paid or the amount of transfer fees that were paid for them, are matching players who are much further up the scale in both those regards. And if you take a cup final, then for Hibs, this is their season, right? They're already they're going to do well to finish in the top 5, even though by most metrics they should be in the top 5. If they win a cup this year, that's a tremendous season for Hibs. So they've got a chance to actually have a great season. If Celtic win the cup, it is but base camp on the climb to Everest for Celtic season, right? I mean, it's a great achievement and we'd all celebrate it. But if we win the cup and that's all that happens, and we lose Kyogo for 3 months because he shouldn't have played, it'll be a freaking disaster in the larger scheme of things. So we're going to be up against an opponent whose players, like St Johnstone did in that semi-final, St Johnstone are in rotten form. They're caught in a horrible trap of feeling like they have to play this really dour defensive game, because that's what got them success last year, without any of the upsides of some of the creativity that they lost. And they still ran Celtic. I mean, it wasn't a close game, but it was a 1-0 game. And an Alan Muir or whatever, Ewan Anderson, influences it. And suddenly, you're down to 10 men. A penalty is magicked out of nowhere. And you lose the final, right? That's what can easily happen, as we keep saying. So we're going to be up against a super motivated opponent whose season could completely turn around, even if they only won that one game and still finish mid-table. They'd call that success. Looking to impress a new manager, so danger everywhere, really. They're the only team domestically to get 10 shots off against Celtic, since you'd have to go back to the Aberdeen away game in that high wind to find one before that. But on the other hand, they lost two players the other night. Nisbet and Cadden both went off injured. Now Nisbet, they'll both be big blows for them, because Cadden's their right wing back, and they went back to a back three against Dundee at home. Nisbet's obviously his form starting to improve now. It was really poor at the beginning of the season. He was very unproductive. He was getting better. I don't know if they're going to play, but they certainly got taken off in that game. So there's a little bit of a ray of light in that regard. But and then actually they're more defensively solid than their league position would suggest, and they're not great at set pieces. But they should be top five. They should easily be top five and battling it out with Aberdeen and Hearts for that third position. That's where their underlying metrics suggest. So they are a better team than they seem. And we just need to not. But for me, I think it'll take care of itself for Celtic. I mean, you saw last night there was no, for as much as we struggled to score that second goal that would have killed the game because of the weaknesses that we saw, there was no lack of trying to create. There's no lack of actually creating chances. We just can't finish them off. So structurally for Celtic, I think we're in a good place. I think the game will take care of itself for Celtic, in the sense of, obviously one of Postecoglou's strengths is he can get a team motivated and on the park to play. We saw that against Betis for players that were matching opponents way above their pay grade, all over the park. And that's what Hibs will try and do on Sunday. My big fear is the residual from this game. Two things. One, if we try and play players that shouldn't be playing, and I'll make reference to the fact that who decided that Forrest was fit to play against Motherwell? Because you looked at him after 2 minutes, you could see he wasn't fit to play the game. And the other thing that concerned me in the Betis game was that, Bitton missed a game because of concussion, and he got wiped out, and he was on the deck, right? And they were testing him for about 4 minutes with a head injury, and he stayed on the pitch. And to James's point, they're not looking after these players well enough, in my opinion. And I'm going to say that because this has been going on for years. I can go back on Tierney, on Lustig, the way that he was treated on occasion. So my big fears are that we try and patch people up and put them on the pitch, and then we lose players for games coming up. And the second fear is actually I'm more concerned about St Mirren away and St Johnstone away than I am about Sunday's game, because I think it'll take care of itself, having said all that, if that makes sense. I think the come down, if we do win the cup, the come down and then going out and going again against St Mirren 3 days later, that would be a real concern for me with the current patched up state of the squad.
Yeah, to put this in a little bit of perspective, if you look at the expected points table, Hibs is, depending on the model, right around third or fourth. So they've actually come in a little bit better than Hearts, depending on the model. And Hearts has not been an easy game this season, and they can put up a pretty decent challenge. And the thing is that, as Alan said, that Hibs' defending is better, and their ability to stymie opponents' chance creation has been better than Hearts. So they've underperformed a little bit in that regard, and I haven't looked at them that close. I don't think they have a new keeper this season, so I don't know how he's been shaping up relative to Marciano, who was pretty decent. So maybe there's an issue there. I don't know. I'll probably take a closer look as we get closer. But so yeah, I think they're dangerous enough, and given our issues, shall we say, with selection availability. Like I said, I'm kind of in right around a 1-3 probability mindset, which is uncomfortable in a one-off game. You just need a couple of, bad breaks. And I looked, I didn't see anything quick. Do we know who's reffing the game?
Does it matter? They're giving it to
it is.
Astonishing.
Well, then,
it's obviously a reward for a long stream of consistently good performances. It must be.
Yeah, maybe take that up to 50.
Final.
I'm going to go up to 50-50 then, maybe. From 1-3 to 1-2. So, yeah, that's.
That doesn't sound very confident. Do you think we're going to win in short?
I don't know. I am uncomfortable about the game. Let's put it that way. I'm uncomfortable about the game.
Alan?
Yeah, I think we'll win. Because I think Ange will get them up. We'll play a strong side. We'll be on the front foot. Our underlying performances are consistent, and I think we'll be too good for Hibs. Will we then go and draw 1-1 with St Mirren? And I know I'm not taking one game at a time, but that's my concern.
You have to take every game on its merits, as John Giles would say. Listen, we shall see. Hopefully Celtic do get a win. It'll be very, very interesting to see what happens with the starting lineup, because I know a lot of people were looking at the lineup against Ross County and thinking, oh shit, we cannot go into a final with this. But I would say we went into that game with that team specifically for the reason that we won't be going into the final with that same starting lineup. So it'll be interesting times to see if Celtic can get their first trophy under Ange Postecoglou. Hopefully they do, and hopefully it's not a 121 minutes plus game is what I'm kind of hoping. Yeah, I really hope that I just
Liam Scales with the last penalty. 10 players in to win it. That's what.
If it goes down to penalties, Hibs will Hibs it. Yeah, come on.
Well, we shall see. We'll be back with a sort of review of that and the game against St Mirren as well next week, because I guess it's just so busy at this point in time that we won't really get a chance to do a Christmas special. I think we did a Christmas special last year, but there's so many games that we just can't afford to take any time off. So next Thursday is not quite Christmas Eve; it's Christmas Eve. So I think will we do a Christmas show?
Yeah. We'll do something.
Yeah. We might as well.
Got a week to think about it.
Give me an excuse for some weekday day drinking. So yes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Christmas Eve. Yeah, you're allowed to drink at that point. So we might do a late night one.
I'm going to put you on with my wife and have you have a conversation with her. Then you're very persuasive.
Got to bear in mind it's about 9 o'clock in the morning for James. So
yeah. It's never too early to have a drink if you're chatting about Celtic. But anyway, that is the Huddle Breakdown for this week. Hopefully Celtic will get a win this weekend, and we'll get to chat about that next week. If you want to find this podcast, it'll be on Spotify in a wee bit, and on iTunes as well, or wherever you get your podcasts, and it's on the YouTube channel as well. If you subscribe, you'll get notified every time the show goes live. So follow us on Twitter at Huddle Breakdown if you want to keep in touch with us on a weekly basis. James, Allen, thanks for that.
Thanks, guys.